to you, and Paul McNamee. Guys, thanks very much for being with us. We're going to start with the fallout from an interview that the Prime Minister gave over the past couple of days, talking about whether or not some protests that are coming up need to be banned. It's taken a couple of days for him to get there. Pressure from opposition groups, opposition leaders in Parliament for him to do this sooner, but now Keir Starmer says they could be banned under certain circumstances.
Yeah, and of course this comes after the Golders Green, horrific attack in Golders Green on two Jewish men. And Keir Starmer's in the Today programme basically saying that definitely cracking down on anti-Semitic speech. So what he would class as that would be chants like from the river to the sea, globalised intifada, which is hard to understand as anything other than kind of attacks on Jewish people as well as the Israeli state. But also he opens up the question of banning these protests altogether, although he doesn't completely say that he will actually do that. Yeah.
And Paul, of course, other people hear those chants and they don't see it as an attack on Jewish people or the Israeli state, do they?
Well, I think that's the issue, because a lot of people who take part in some of the protests will say, well, this is in support for those who have been affected in Gaza and Palestinian people, and there is clearly an element within those marches that is anti-Semitic, and I think that's where the conflict arises, because on the one hand, you want to make sure that Jewish people feel safe and confident in Britain. And there is a history, obviously there's a history of anti-Semitism, but at times of unrest and at times of financial insecurity and all these kind of things, anti-Semitism bubbles up again. It's just one of these terrible, terrible things that just will not go away. And with the idea of protest outright, Lord John Mann now, former Labour MP who has been the government advisor on anti-Semitism since 2019, Theresa May put him in place. He has written in The Sun today, and he actually says that he doesn't believe a blanket ban is the way to go for these particular protests. He believes in cracking down on those who show support for terror groups and arresting and prosecuting them, which I think it shows some good sense, because on the one hand, it shows that you're taking the concerns of the Jewish population seriously. You know that there are great fears. You know that they're literally under attack. But not everybody involved in these protests comes from that particular place. And when it's somebody like John Mann, who has been involved for a decade or more in support for Jewish communities in Britain, when he says something like that, is really worth listening to, I think.
Yeah, and Stop the War themselves, which of course helps organise a number of these marches, they say they condemn all forms of anti-Semitism and racism, but they say it's wrong to connect the marches to any attacks on Jews, and they are obviously keen for it to go ahead. Another argument that's put forward in favour of the protests is the kind of civil liberties and the right to protest. That's something that people feel should be fiercely defended.
Definitely, and we shouldn't be eroding that easily at all. And actually, you know, the government's already been in trouble for this over Palestine Action, because that's actually a prescription that the courts have now overturned. And so there are obviously legitimate reasons to criticise Israel, especially at a time of such global turbulence. The question is how many people who are chanting these slogans are actually not really criticising the Israeli government and have something else in mind. And it's, of course, a really hard thing to make policy on, because it's such a nuanced and subtle difference, I think. You can criticise Israel without being an anti-Semite, but also a lot of people who criticise Israel are anti-Semite. So, you know, how do you separate those bad apples, basically, as it were?
That's the point that Cameron Vaynock is making, exactly that. Now, this is all leading up to the protests that are due on the 16th of May, which is Nakba Day protests. Also on that day, you got Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who goes by Tom Robinson, got a Unite the Kingdom, Unite the West rally as well. So policing on that day is going to already be overstretched in London, and it's the FA Cup final. So there is a review of whether or not these protests can go ahead as currently planned.
Yeah, and we have to wait and see what the police decide on that, because, as you say, there's so many of these things. I mean, if you go to London on any given Saturday, you will probably encounter some kind of protest. Yesterday, just along Piccadilly, there was a protest against the Iranian regime. Quite a vocal and long and colourful protest. So these, not even just the big ones that you've identified, there tends to be loads of smaller ones, and they need policed. And so I think that we are coming to some kind of pinch point with this on how much further they can go.
Interesting.
Let's move on to other issues. Cindy, in the Express, a story here about, well, it talks about the power of elderly voters, and there's a sense from a think tank that perhaps they're distorting policy. I think they're referring to the triple lock, aren't they?
Yeah, and so basically, this report is by Labour Together, which is obviously very, very close to the Labour Party. It used to be led by Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's former Chief of Staff, and the report basically advises on compulsory voting, so that young voters are forced to turn out in basically a representative way to their numbers, because actually those who are aged 65 or older have 34 points higher to turn up than those who are 18 to 24. And so basically the report is making a point of saying this kind of disproportionate influence of elderly voters on politics means that things like the triple lock, which is costing about £10 billion a year, estimated to cost up to £15 billion a year by the end of this decade, cannot be scrapped. Now, this article comes from The Express, and it is spitting text there. So the article has a quote from Dennis Reed of Silver Voices, which is a campaign group, saying that this is actually just discrimination against older voters, that this is erasure of their concerns, etc., etc. But I think it is such an interesting dynamic that we have in politics today, that actually very expensive policies cannot really be scrapped because of the high influence of older voters. And, I think this report is right when it comes to that.
What do you think of this? Because the triple lock is to protect pensioners' income, and some people say that they don't have many alternatives to boost their income when they get to a certain age. It's harder to get another job, for example. But then younger people would say, we have life's much tougher for us, and pensioners are being looked after. I mean, where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it is much tougher for younger people than it was a decade ago, never mind a generation ago. Whether that is in the jobs market, whether that's fear of AI taking their jobs, whether that's housing market, not just availability, but cost and being able to maintain rented accommodation. I think that there are many more pressures and headwinds that younger people face. But the interesting thing about that is it comes on the same day as in the Sunday Times, there is a warning that teachers are set to strike over deal hit by inflation.
Yeah, this is page 2 of the Times.
Yes,
isn't it?
and what the story here, which there's a lot of caveats to it, so whether or not a full strike will come is anybody's guess. But it's basically saying that because teacher pay rises are linked to inflation, and government inflation was, consumer price index was 3.3% in March, but that's expected to rise higher. Then will teachers' pay have to go up, or will it be locked in at a particular place? Now, if it was following the way pensions are, obviously it would go up, and you could make the argument, well, teachers are adding this particular thing to society. They mould the future generations, so they should be looked after. But they're an easy target. So as soon as teachers say, well, hold on, we've got to be looked after as well, it becomes a thing. Well, hold on, your teacher's about to go on strike. You don't want that. We've got to do something about it. So I think that there is sometimes there is a bit of duplicity in the argument that it's okay for one side of society, but not for another. And that's dangerous, because it will just mean that there's always some kind of split.
Yeah, and just on the generational fairness thing as well, we were just reporting on Friday, weren't we? Tony Blair Institute coming in and commenting on the triple lock being scrapped because of that exact argument we're having here about the generational fairness of the support that pensioners get.
Well, working age adults are now much more likely to be in poverty than pensioners. And actually children are the most likely to be in poverty, but children of these working age adults. And so, something like the triple lock is of course great when your country can afford it and when it's aimed at the right group. But actually pensioners are not the poorest group in this country anymore. And we need to be able to adapt policy in order to reflect that.
But the voting power of it, as
but the voting
power is what stops it from happening.
But then that takes us back to this sense of knee-jerk politics. And Keir Starmer, to a degree, been locked in that cycle of not being able to push ahead, of saying we're facing tough times, we've got to think in 3 to 5 year cycles rather than in 3 to 6 month cycles, which brings us back to the same problem again.
We're going to rattle through a few other stories. How long do we have? Just remind me. We've got about 3 minutes, and I'm very tempted to go to bees on a trapeze.
We have to go to bees on a trapeze.
What it's about, but I'm hoping it does what it says on the tin.
Yeah, you have to let Paul do this one because he's so excited about bees on the trapeze.
Let's be clear, it's bumblebees, not honeybees. And I'll be as quick
I'm
as
so
I
glad
could.
you clarified that. That makes the story so much more understandable.
I like this story simply because we could say bees on a trapeze.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, this turns out to be a little more complicated than I had anticipated, but I'll be as fast as I can.
OK, go ahead.
There's an issue with bumblebees and pesticides. Apparently, particular pesticides, when they hit bumblebees, who are essential pollinators, it stops them pollinating. Apparently, they go like mad for a while, and then they run out of energy, and they can't pollinate. And then that drops their body temperature. When they go into the hive, the temperature lowers, so larvae can't grow, so more pollinators can't grow. And the trapeze aspect is because boffins have found a way to attach a bumblebee to a trapeze, watch it move around, work out how far it flies, how much energy it expends, and then how pesticides are affecting that. Then they have to work out how to either drop the pesticides or make the bees resistant.
Right.
David Attenborough is going to be out of a job. That was very well done.
So it could help them when we get the research. All right, good. Move on to this next one then. What do thanks for the boffins. I've got it in front of me here, so I guess it's the celebrity traitors. We were talking about this off camera, weren't we?
Yeah.
Is everyone excited?
I think everyone's talking about it, aren't they?
You're not excited?
I am excited. Well, I've got my own issues. I'll tell you afterwards. You carry on.
No, I'm very excited.
It's about scheduling. It's about scheduling.
It's about scheduling. I'd like it to be like a family event over Christmas, and I don't like how they do it early in the
Can't wait that long.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. People can't wait that long. It's, of course, been a runaway success of a format, you know, from a few years ago when it first launched. It's now got American versions. I think there's an Australian version.
There's an Irish version.
Right,
Canadian,
and then there are board games, and then there are real events. But anyway, so the celebrity version hit first last year, and they are now bringing it back again. And they've got an amazing cast. Michael Sheen, the actor, Jerry Hall, the former wife of Rupert Murdoch, Amol Rajan, who knew he left the Today programme in order to join the traitors.
That was the big reason.
As well as numerous other, you know, comedians that people would know, and scientists like Hannah Fry. And so I think it's going to be great, because one thing that watching it shows is actually how hard something like this is.
Yes.
That someone you think is really, really intelligent, and no offence to Stephen Fry here, but someone you think is really, really intelligent goes in there and actually still struggles.
Yeah, do you watch it, Paul? I was a convert to it.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
I don't really watch it. And I'm
See,
glad
I
to
was
see,
like you
I'm
once.
glad to see that Ramesh Ranganathan is on it, because that fella needs some work. You know,
Well, yeah, but I like the fact that he's on it, because he's on with his great mate Rob Beckett.
Yeah.
And I think it's great when you've got people who think they know each other really well, and to see whether or not they
you
can
want to see a
read each
breakdown
other.
of that relationship.
I'm going to recommend... Well, I was like you once. I'm going to recommend it for you, man. It is incredible TV. It really is. It's good fun to watch. I know. I did the same thing, but once you start watching it...
Just as long as it's on at Christmas.
Yeah, as long as I can watch it as a family.
Anyway, great to have your company this morning.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for taking us through the papers. Do stay with us. We've got the top stories coming your way in just a moment.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist